welcome everyone to our educational webinar today, and just thank you guys for joining. Today's topic will be elevate your design capabilities with NX Sketcher. My name is Mason Wu from ATA Engineering. I am based in the San Diego office. I'm very happy today to be joined by Michael Senedak from Siemens, who is a subject matter expert of NX software. He will be the one presenting the new NX Sketcher tool today. Before we dive into our webinar, there's some housekeeping notes. So all attendees will be muted throughout the webinar. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat. We have a Q&A chat or a regular chat box, and we'll have Michael answer them at the end of the presentation. You will also have a chance to speak and ask Michael directly at the end of the webinar, and we'll unmute you. Just please let us know. This webinar will be recorded and will be available on our website and our YouTube channel. Oops. All right, I'll just give a really quick introduction of ATA Engineering, and I'll give it to Mike to deliver that really interesting presentation. So most people recognize ATA as an engineering service company. Our core funders have been together for over 40 years and have vast experience providing high-value engineering services focused on test and analysis-driven design. Majority of our business are in the aerospace and defense industry, but we also have work on other industry as well, as you can see on the slide. A little bit about who we are. ATA is an employee-owned small business with a full-time staff just over 200 people. Most of them have an advanced engineering degree, as you can see on the right. We have 7 regional offices across the US, and as I have mentioned before, we have years of experience focusing on design, analysis, and tests. This includes everything from structural design, structural dynamics, thermal analysis, and to fluid dynamics and more. Test-wise, we are also the leading independent modal test group in the US. We have a lot of experience flying our team to the test article location, conducting ground vibration testing, and use that information to help drive the model design. Aside from our engineering service business, this is how most of you joining the webinar today know about ATA Engineering. We are a Siemens VAR value-added reseller who not only sells the product, but also provides software support and training to our customers. We really focus on products and solutions that help design, analysis, and test. For example, NX, which is our topic for today as for design, FEMAP Star CCM for simulation, and for test, we are the sole Siemens partner in the US, providing sim-centered test and measurement, including software and hardware. Because we sell what we use, so our customer appreciate our familiarity of these tools, and it really shows in our hotline support. Every time they call, they're speaking with engineers who uses the software every day and understand the problem. In addition to that, we teach a variety of classes, primarily dealing with simulation. We're the one generating all the Siemens training material for Nastran classes. So a lot of time when you go up online and find a Nastran class, ATA will be the one teaching it. Last slide before I hand it to Mike, I wanted to encourage people to visit our website. It has our hotline support information, which is one of the unique advantage getting your Siemens support, software support from ATA Engineering, and some free resources, including past webinars, FEMAP APIs, white papers that you can download. All right, with that being said, I'm happy to introduce today's speaker, Michael Senedak. He is a partner solution consultant and team leader at Siemens. He has over 26 years of experience and a SME in NX CAD and oversees resources related to NX CAD, CAM, Solid Edge, and SimCenter 3D. Take it away, Mike.
Great, thank you, Mason. So Appreciate everyone joining today's session. And as Mason said, today's topic is the new NX Sketcher. And so our agenda for the next 45 minutes will be to go over some of the fundamentals, give you an overview of that. We'll look at some of the best practices that we're encouraging with the new sketch, and then talk a little bit about a couple of the challenges that you might encounter. You maybe have more, but we'll talk about some of the key things that we're seeing with customers. And then we'll talk, close out really with how to get started. What are the best ways to enable your team and get moving with the Sketcher? And then, as Mason said, we'll take some Q&A at the end as we have a few minutes. So if you do, please put them in the chat. My colleague, Brandon Carter, is also with me today. And so we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. If not, we will follow up as we go. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into the fundamentals. So, many question, why make a change to the Sketcher? What was the driving force behind that? And really it was us asking a number of questions about how people use sketching for their designs. And so, we've been putting a lot of effort and investment in around, how about if the constraining could be done for you? What if we could anticipate things that you're trying to do with the Sketcher? How about applying a lot of these relationships, automatically based on the geometry that you're working with? So there was a lot that we focused in on that with what customers were doing and how they were using the tools. And so, the normal is Sketcher is a task environment. You're working in there, creating geometry, applying, your dimensions to the sketch, as well as, traditionally constraining it geometrically, right? And trying to develop that design intent. And so what we looked at it was, how do we save you time with that? How can we, improve what people are doing inside the sketch? So one of those is, looking at those three paradigms up above is how do we remove or shorten those tasks? And so we've introduced a new solver that helps to find the relations and do a lot of that intelligent work for us. And also just your streamlined user interaction. And you'll see that as we go through the demos. So one area is just, with the previous sketching environment, if you didn't have all the constraints and stuff, as you started to drag or move geometry around, things would disassociate. They would disconnect. You'd have to go back in and do certain work with that. So now with the new Sketcher, there is a connectivity. There is, for all the geometry that is input for your design, you can see how on the screen, as we move and adjust, that sketch is adapting with that. And the ones you see on the screen, there's no dimensions, there's no geometric constraints or anything like that. It's just using the geometry and the solver to do that work. And so that's really number one, is the new solver. What is it actually doing? And so it is automatically finding those relationships between that curved geometry. So as you can see in this example, when we go to make a change to a dimension, all of those symbols in blue are all of those relationships to the geometry. We didn't have to, as a user, apply any of that. That's automatically coming up through the auditing of the dimensions. So you're able to, do things much faster. You're able to change your design intent much quicker with the way this is done. And so there are tools to help, what relations would you like it to find? You can turn those on and off and fine tune that to what you want it to look for. And, it just allows us to control much better, much faster as we're doing the development of our sketch. So that's number one, is the solver. Number two, then, as we talked about, is the interaction model. So for those that have used NX or even back to Unigraphics, you're familiar with the sketching environment. But now, as you see, the geometry, same type of creation, but now when you select and add dimensions, you can see you're just going to select the object. It puts that dimension on. You can automatically move into the creation. You can see the drag arrows to move things around. You can also see that the relations pop up So specific to that particular curve or geometry that we're working on, it shows just the things that are important to that. So rather than turning everything on, we're seeing some very specific information about the sketch. So also right mouse button actions. So you can still create reference geometry. You can do your expressions, all of those types of things from the right mouse button as you're working in it. Another thing that I really like is the shaded region. So in the past, if you had your profile and you didn't close it, you might not know that until you started exercising the parametrics. Well, here right away graphically I can see wherever it's shaded, I know that I have that closed loop, and so that gives me the information. Also, there's some information about the colors. We'll talk about that a little more as we go, but right off the bat, you can see what's going on and understand visually what you're seeing there. So you see a lot of the dragging and moving, whether you're doing a dimension or the geometry itself. So the interaction model, we've tried to clean that up, present only the most important information to the user. So as you're starting out and doing design intent, this is probably one of the most important areas as we begin, right? So the curve creation is the same as before, and you're putting the curves and dimensions to design, to set your design intent. So the relations are only found when we start to make changes, right? So in this example, we're taking that block, and what you saw is by putting the dimensions on, we were able to skew that box, right? So what it did was it relaxed in the pink that horizontal relation that was on there. And so that's one thing, that might be different from what you're accustomed to, is that the dimensions are stronger than the found relations. That's one big thing that as people start to work is keep that in mind. So you could see here, as I put the two dimensions on either side of the box, it's automatically relaxing that horizontal relation. And so those are some things that maybe initially that will take a little bit of getting used to, but that's the driver behind this. Is remember that dimensions are the driving piece of this. So also the curve creation, as we mentioned, you're going to do the same things that you've always done inside of NX Sketcher. So as you put the curves down, the main things now are whether you're doing the curve, when you select the curve geometry, that's going to give you certain capability. You can do certain changes with that. Also, you'll see the control points or control information. When you select those, as we see in this arc, it allows you to do different things, right? So if we click on the center, we're moving the center of the arc. If we're picking on the endpoints, we're adjusting, the end of the arc or line segment. So all of those, by selecting on that, you get a little bit different behavior. So those will be some things up front as you start to work in it, understanding how does that impact based upon what you've actually selected. So the dimensions, as we said, those are the main drivers of your design intent. So as you're selecting and moving, you can see that, the arrows pop up. This is something different than before, is you have the arrows on each end. You can grab those and drive that. As you're working, if you want other geometry to go with it, you can select box select or individual select to add those things into it. So in that example that you see playing is you can, move or lengthen those and do that not only with the dimension, but additional geometry as you work. There's other things that you can do. You can set it to be directional. So if I only want it to go, say, on the right side, the right mouse button will set that up. You can also convert to half dimensions. So if you have a diameter, you can go ahead and select that, convert that to the diameter value. So a couple nice things there, but the main thing is as you're adjusting any dimensions, you can add geometry to that and move it together all as one grouping. So expressions. So by default, when you put the dimensions on, they're just a constant. So you'll notice that when I create them, it just puts the constant value, that's it, right? So you go in, you can edit that value. It goes in when you create that dimension. If you would like the expressions, then you can explicitly tell it, hey, I want an expression for that. So as you're working, if you want to do a bunch of them, or if you want all of them in the sketch, what you can do is just place your values out, and you don't have to do them one at a time. And you can do the filter on the selection intent bar to say, give me all the dimensions, right mouse button, and convert those to expressions. So, ways to keep going faster as you work through it. So the other thing is, you can also, from outside the sketch, do the edit parameters. And what happens with that, which is nice, is that then you can see what's the impact of those expressions. We can exercise the sketch, make sure that everything we need to do is working properly. So the expressions are still there, definitely available to you. But again, initially they're just as constant. So that, again, for existing users is a little bit new. For new users, that's what you'll see. That's what you should anticipate. So then there are the make commands. So many people will look at this and think, well, that's a geometric constraint, right? It actually is different. So we call them make commands. So it's not creating a specific relation. It's putting some information into the solver so that we know, hey, make this coplanar, make this tangent, make it perpendicular, right? And so you're using that to help the solver the next time it goes in and looks at those relations, because you saw it finds them. Those were all the little blue symbols that popped up. So you want to make sure that as you do those, just know that it is different than what we've done in the past with geometric constraints. So the big thing here is, if you select something, the first object that you select, that's what's going to move, okay? And then the second object is what it's going to keep stationary and adjust to. So as you go through it, you might think, oh, well, I want this to be tangent. I'm going to pick the line and then the circle. Well, if you do it the other way around, the line will stay stationary and the circle will move, or the fillet will move. So how that comes out is we have two options. You can do object action, which is pick the curve and then tell it, make it tangent. We think that's the fastest because you don't have to go to the menu. You don't have to do anything extra. You just pick the geometry and pick the button. Or you have action object, right? So in this case, you'll pick from that toolbar up above, hey, I want to make it equal. And then you go ahead and pick the two objects. So either one is fine to operate. It's just knowing, number one, the object action is quicker for you as a user. And number two, the first object that you select, that's what's going to move on screen. So those are a couple of things just to keep in mind as you apply those. Also then, these found relations, right? So I don't have to go in and apply, horizontal, vertical, all that to everything. It's going to go and look at the curves that I've created. And when I go to make a change to a curve or to a dimension, it's going to bring up those little blue icons. And the cyan, the blue color, cyan color, those are active. So if I try to move something, it's going to keep things from moving. So in that case, the horizontal will stay fixed. The magenta are ones that we would basically relax. So what it means is you can override what that says. So if we remember in the first little demo, when I tried to change, I had a dimension on either side of the box. When I moved the second dimension, what it did was it automatically relaxed the horizontal relation. And so you could see that. I could see what was happening just by the colored cues on there. So again, there's some manual relaxation that I can do. So if I'm changing something and I want to override, I can just literally pick it from the screen. Or in the case of like with the dimension, it automatically overrides it. It will go ahead and turn it off and do the things so that it can adjust the value of the dimension. And again, the reason for that is that the dimensions are stronger than the relations. They take priority in the solver when it's going through that update. Okay. There are some the single key accelerators. So if you slide over any of the buttons, you'll see like make collinear. You could hit the C character, that will kick you already into it. So there are those accelerators, and again the object action to help you guys go faster with the sketcher. Also, as you can see, there is a dialog for the relations finder. So if there are ones that you either want all of them turned on, or if you would like to turn some specific ones off, you can do that from that dialog. Just uncheck them, and then the solver will not be looking for them as you go to make some changes there. Also then sketch status, right? So there's a button you can turn on. It says show movable. So when we're creating the sketch, everything that is in black is fully defined, so it shouldn't move around. The curves and that can move will be in brown. So as you go in, as you can see in this little example here, when I select those curves, I can drag those around the sketch, no problem. But you see everything else stays put, right? It's already constrained. It's not going to move around. So as you continue to put the dimensions and put everything on, you'll fully define. So again, that's a term that we're using. It's fully defined, right? You have all the information to keep it from moving around on the screen. Another thing that we have is if there's something that's either inconsistently defined or over defined objects, you'll see them highlight in red. So in this case, what we have is a dimension, and we have it connected to the horizontal line. What we have there is, it is conflicting with what we have. We'll talk in a minute about the persistent relations. So you'll see anything that is causing some problems, those will be in red. So usually you have to look at that to either, reassign it, delete it, make changes to that. So let's take a look at a little more complicated example and just walk you through, how do we start from scratch and create the sketch that you see here. So as we mentioned, it's a task environment. As you're going through with all the curve creation, it is the same as it's always been, whether you're doing the profile, whether you're doing independent curves, so like circles, lines, arcs, those type. What you'll notice is as I place something, if I type in the size, it's going to create, in this case, the circle that size, and it will auto assign a dimension to that. What you notice is I didn't have to do the 25 on both those circles. It understood once I had defined it, those are both 25 millimeters that are set up. So as you go in, things where maybe we want the center point of the circle, you can go in then and touch on the circle. It will highlight those control points, and then you can pick the control point to do that. So all of that. One thing also is you see the dashed lines as like the center, right? Thinking of that as like location 0, right? So in the past, you could just sketch into space and put them on there. You can still do that. We can sketch away from that basically 0 point. But if you want to do some of the mirroring and things, it just makes it easier. Not that we can't mirror or offset and do things, but this allows you to do all of that around those center lines. As you're going in and creating additional geometry, that allows you to go in and still do the trimming, extending, all those things, filleting like you would expect. As we generate that fillet, you'll notice that because I had a size, it put the dimension, but it also puts a dot there. That actually is the intersection point, right? So if we untrim that, it keeps it there. So if you want to dimension to that, it makes it very easy for the user to do that. Also things that you have we'll have both the selection intent and the point menu. So you can turn on the different types. Like in this case, I need the point on curve. because I'm doing a lot of this where we're connecting these arcs to the circles. So you have control over those. Again, here's with the make commands. So in this case, I'm using the action object. I chose to say, let me make this tangent. And what you'll notice is as I create the objects or select the objects, you actually get the feedback for the little circle is, hey, that's the location. And then there's like a little blue line there. That helps us know that, yes, in fact, they are tangent at that location. So again, you'll notice it only shows up the information right where I'm working. So we're not turning on everything. We're localizing what are the important things that I need to see right in the area that we're working there. So again, same thing here. What you notice is I needed to move the arc up. So that's what I picked first as my moving object, and then the horizontal curve there. Things like angles, when you pick the geometry, you can, by moving the dimension, you can get, the complementary angle. If you go on the outside or inside, it automatically does that for you. So as you continue to put these through, it's evaluating the sketch and putting all the detail in. Now, some of the nice things with offsetting and patterning and mirroring, you can see that it'll actually create the dimension for us. It'll remember that as we go to make changes. You can go back in, all the details that you would need to drive those. And as I mentioned, with the selection intent here, I did the connected curves. So it grabbed all of those in one selection rather than individual steps for that. And, trimming is the same. You can either just select the curve or use the eraser to drag across the geometry that's there. So you can see as we're going, what happened. We had a profile. We started making it where it was not. And then once we had trimmed everything, you can see now the profile takes care of all of the geometry that we're working from. So as we go forward, we'll put a few more pieces of geometry in, but then we'll showcase, now how do we exercise it? How do we make some changes to that? And so as I mentioned, when we put the diameter, it was 16 millimeters. It's the same in the other location. You see that it does pick up on all the smart points, the center points, the quad points, those types of things. So, now we've got it, a fairly detailed, sketch profile on that. Now you can start to make those changes. So go ahead and, grab the dimension. You can see all of the relations turn on where they're impacted by that change. And again, if we wanted to relax any of those, you could just select them as you're making the dimension change. They'll turn pink or magenta, and you could make those overrides as you go to that. So it's just how you want to modify. But what you'll notice is, tend to go in and do the dimensions. And as I put in here, I put some expressions. You can do the formulas just like you did before. You have access to measurements, the expression system, just like we always have. Those are available to you inside the sketch environment. So you can see in that method, by making them equal or a formula, we're driving both at the same time. If you take any of the dimensions off, here you can have reference geometry. So similar to before, maybe you want those to be, collinear across there, but you can convert that to reference geometry. Or if it's something you want to have it tangent to, you can do those as well. So see here, as we adjust that height, the rest of the sketch is moving along with it. So just some ways to quickly go through and show a little bit more detailed example of how that goes. So that's the fundamentals with that. So as we continue on, then we'll talk a little bit about some of the best practices, right? So some of the things we want to encourage in how to use it. So one of them is, the whole idea of this relaxed dimensions. And some people say, well, why do we need that, or what would we do? So the example that we're showing is, it will temporarily relax them. So what you saw is I can relax dimensions, I can relax the relations, and you see we're turning those, into a state where now I could rotate this thing, right? So there's a rotate and drag operation. And if you had that all constrained with, vertical geometry and horizontal dimensions and stuff, you really wouldn't be able to change that design intent drastically from that sketch. You'd have to delete a lot of things and go back and start from scratch. And so here, with relaxing dimensions, being able to relax those relations, all of that will allow you to make some pretty dramatic changes that you might not have anticipated when you first started laying something out. And so the main thing is, when they go to the magenta color, that shows you that those are the things that you can actually change while you're dragging or adjusting a dimension. Those will make the changes for you. So one other thing that we have is, with the make commands on the end of the toolbar, you can actually create persistent relations. So what the persistent relations do is, if you see in this example, this is the same one we started with. So where I told that to be persistently horizontal, no matter what happens, keep that horizontal, don't allow it to change. And so what that does is, that persistent relation actually is stronger than that dimension in that example. And so what did we say before? Dimensions are the top, but if you go in and put this, it will not automatically relax like we saw with the relations. So it is something that is more like putting the peg in the ground. It's holding that to that particular relation that we're putting on there. So you can still override if you manually select it. We could override it, but by putting that persistent dimension, that holds it down a little bit more. And so the big thing is, we do not encourage a lot of that. There were some initial things when the solver first came out. The example would be, if you had something at the midpoint and you wanted to control it, you needed to create a persistent relationship. Those things have been updated. We don't need that anymore. Also, what happens is, where persistent relations come into play, and you'll see this coming up, is with a lot of your legacy sketches. If you bring them forward and you want to renew them into the new sketch, the system will handle that with a lot of persistent relations. So just being aware that that's there, you can do some of that work. But again, we're trying to say, let the solver find the relations rather than create them all persistently. Another one is external geometry. Many times when you're creating profiles and working, you may want to be able to constrain, I shouldn't say constrain, should say relation, build a relation, take a measurement to other geometry. So the idea there is, we can include that geometry. There's a command there that will include. So in this case, I had a curve, I had an edge, and I had a point that I'm working from, the center point of the hole. That's what we're including into my sketch. And so that's best practice, is include that geometry in. Then as we make changes to that geometry exterior, that will still update and drive the sketch that we have. And so that just makes it very easy to, to put those external geometry drivers, into the sketch environment. So we're not copying it, we're just referencing it. And so like the curve, now you see as we edit those or make changes, that information helps drive that particular edge. We had dimensioned off of that. If we move the whole feature, you'll notice that your sketch is going to update. And that was the bigger clearance diameter that I had put on there. It stayed connected to the center point of that hole. So just some ways to help you as you do that, right? So keep that associativity to things that are outside the sketch. So this gets us to, kind of the biggest thing with the June release of NX, which is NX 2306. It came out in the June timeframe, and that was prior to this release in June. When you had an existing legacy sketch, you only had three options, right? When you opened it up and you said, hey, I need to do something to it, you could edit the parameters of the sketch, and that would allow you to make it longer, wider, thicker, that type of thing. Or you could renew that sketch and then go in and edit if we needed to add additional geometry, if we needed more curves, if we were changing some of the profile, it would create an updated to the new sketch, and then you could work on it. This is prior to the NX 2306, or just cancel, right? We wouldn't do anything with it. This automatically came up when you selected on the sketch. There was no way to turn this off. It came up. That was how you worked with it. So starting in the 2306 and later releases, that menu has gone away. We're not going to force you into that role. What we're actually allowing you to do is you don't have to renew that sketch. If you're fine with what was there, you can actually edit the legacy sketch, and it will actually take you into the legacy task environment. So that was not previously available, but we've made that available to customers with a lot of legacy data in the sketch. That allows you to go back, make the changes of what you're used to and comfortable, and then anything new, go ahead and create it with the new sketcher. So that's a big difference. It's really a big shift in how we were going about things. So in the past, you had no choice. You had to renew old sketches. Now, our best practice is you do not have to do that. We're not saying go in, renew all the old sketches, because in reality, think about the solver was different. And when we go from the old to the new, it was putting information in to help make that transition. And so in some cases, it put a lot of persistent relations that made it a little bit tougher for you to edit. You had to go in and really understand what was going on. And so those have been done away with. So again, if you have legacy sketches, you can edit them in the legacy sketcher. If you're creating new, then you will use the new sketcher for that. Another area then is just relations. So there are things that we talked about. You can just, some get automatically relaxed with dimensions. Others you can pick from the screen. And then there is just a button that says wholesale, just turn all the relations off. Let me just change this geometry. So this has been helpful for sketches that were created with the legacy sketcher. If you turn that button on, it allows us to make changes a lot easier. So that's where, again, a lot of these persistent dimensions have gotten put onto the sketch, legacy sketch, and we need a way to make changes to that. So if you do go through that process, just know that this is something to help you with that. So let's look at that for a second. So here's the difference. If you were in 2212 or previous, when you went in to edit the sketch, this was the menu you saw. And really, if we wanted to do anything, we had to renew the sketch and go in. So not that you can't do that, you can renew them and work with them, but you don't have to. You can see that the environment here was you had to go into the new sketch. When we were done, then it just stopped on that feature. And that's where you would update the rest. So now if we look in 2306, when you go in and edit that sketch, you can see here it's using the old sketch task environment. It still has all the ways that we did that. And you can work from those to remove geometry. And really the main thing was if you were changing the actual curve geometry in the sketch, that's really the main reason to be able to do that. And so that just shows you a way that, hey, in the new sketch, here's how you can work with those and move forward. If you just have to change the parameters, do the expressions, you don't even have to go into the sketcher. You can do that external to make those changes. So that's, really the big difference in 2306. So, again, how would we do that now? So before it automatically came up, what if I do want to renew that sketch? What would I have to do? So in there, we can go to the command finder, and if you just type in renew, renew feature will pop up, and you can use that then. And so it basically shows you a menu of the features, specifically the sketches. And if you want to do one, or if you're doing them, whatever you have in that particular part, you can update them from there. So again, same thing with renew. You can do this with more than just sketch features. There's other features that we have updated over time, and you could renew those. But that's not a wholesale thing. You shouldn't just go through and renew everything. It's really when there's something that we've changed in the code that you want to take advantage of. Sometimes we've added functionality that you want to be able to use. Other things like if you had a problem and it's been fixed in a version and you need to take care of the new feature, then you might do that with renew. Also, you don't have to do it just because, right? It's not a practice that you have to go in and do anything specific with that. So that's doing the renew. So let's take a look at that process. So this example that I have here, if you go back and look at the part history, this part's been around for a long time. This goes back, actually, if you look at all the versions there, it's going back quite a few. In fact, it goes back to the V10, so almost back to 1995 with Unigraphics. So we've got all the sketches, all the features, all the history. And so one way to help you as you're working in the part navigator is look at the status. You can see where it says fully constrained. We know that those are legacy sketches. So you can see here as we filter through those, you're in the legacy sketch and you have access to the information there. So as we mentioned, that's fine to work starting in 2306 and forward. You can do that. Otherwise, if you want to renew a sketch, go ahead and use the command finder in the upper right, and then you can see the list. So any of the ones that we want, you can highlight those and apply them, and it will go ahead and update those. And it does give you, hey, a warning. Yes, we're going to do that. Yes, that's what we want to get done. So in this case, I have two of them. Now, when we look in the status, you'll see where it says fully defined and inconsistently defined. So anything that's with fully defined or defined, those are new sketches. So just again, for the user, how would they know if they have some mixed sketches in there? So in this case, when we go into that one that said it was inconsistently, what you'll see is it created a lot of these persistent relationships on it. And so this is someplace where you can go in, start to look at those and diagnose what, how is this impacting it? And so in this case, we had to do a little work, a little bit of testing, but we found out that that one horizontal one was causing all of our problems. Once we deleted that, you can see that the status, it took them from all red to, hey, it's fully defined now. And we've fixed repaired, the issue that we had there. So with that, then you can see that all of those are fully defined, those two sketches, and everything is good to go. So that's a way to renew it and work with it and go forward. So next, we'll take a look at some of the challenges. So if we look at, as we're working, a couple things that come up, right? So one of them is, with some of this either inconsistent, things that are conflicting. So in this case, when we take this sketch and we bring it down onto the horizontal center line, we use the dimension. So right now, dimension is the top level. What we also did here then was, if you create a persistent dimension, you'll get an alert down in the lower right, and it'll tell you that, look, unless you relax it, you can't make a change to it. So what we have is we have the dimension and we have that relation. So one of the things you can do is, either delete the dimension or delete the relation, but you'll see in red, hey, these are conflicting. We can go to that persistent relation browser if you have any in there, And again, it'll show what is the line, what is the two pieces of information that are driving that relationship. And so if you go in and remove them, then you can fix the sketch. So it's just, I think that happens a lot less because you shouldn't be creating the persistent relations. But if you have, again, legacy sketches that you want to rework, you may run into that, and that's a good way to help you see what's going on. Also, another one that comes up quite a bit is coincident endpoints. So if I have two profiles that I have, and maybe I'm doing a layout and they're next to one another, what happens is those endpoints, they sit on top of each other, they become coincident. Now I can't separate them, I can't move them apart. Well, how do I do that, right? What do I need to do? And so there's a couple tools, ways or techniques to do that. So one is if you grab onto the curve and you basically shake the mouse back and forth, it will break that relationship. Another is you can group the sketches. So you can group segments of the sketch. Again, if you're doing a layout of multiple components, you can create these groups inside the sketcher. It will allow us to do set that coincident relationship. Also, you can do reference curves. If you make some things reference, it will allow you to break that connectivity to that coincident point. So let's take a look at a couple of those. So here you see very simple sketch. We've got the two corners set up there, and no matter what I do, no matter how I move that, it's staying, that coincident corner is staying connected. So one way to do this is showing you with the grouping. You can add a new sketch group and that will set it up. So now we can do that on both sides, create two groups for that information. And then when I go ahead to move that first group, you can see the relation pops up, and I can click on those to say, relax those. Do not use those coincident, and in this case, collinear with the others. So once I relax those, I can move that geometry away from one another. So that was one, just doing the grouping. In this example, what I'm doing is, it's coincident on that corner. I really don't want that, but I don't want to have to delete and recreate. So all you have to do is we can make it a reference curve. Now the persistent relation, the coincident relation pops up. I can relax that and move that to another location. And so now when I turn it back to a regular curve from reference, I can make those changes. So it's just a couple different methods to do that. And then the final one was still using the group, the sketch group here. So what I'm doing with that is, I move that dimension. Here it moved them together. As soon as I moved them together, it thought those points were coincident. So when I tried to separate it, now I couldn't do that. So you could go back and undo, or what we can do is set them as their own independent groups and just make sure that we have that, so that as we adjust those or move them together, I can still separate them after the fact. So again, the sketch groups are important. This is good. You can use the sketch groups like if you're doing even like simple 2D mechanisms and you want to see motion in that, you can do it with the sketch to lay that out and make those changes. So again, just some ways to help you that you might run into these as you've put those sketches together and you don't realize what happened. Why can't I separate this, or why can't I do something with it? So I know this is something that's come up with customers. Okay. So we're just about done here. The last part then was getting started. So for those of you that are just wading into the new sketch pool and wanting to see how to do this, as you go into the sketching environment, there are what we call first help. So you can look on the browser. If you go to the NX browser, there's over 60 sketch videos and tutorials there. And so if you're brand new to the sketch, and these are very short, they're a couple minutes long, this is definitely a very important piece to help you with that. So there are things for, legacy users. If you've been accustomed to Unigraphics and NX and such, take a look at those videos. Those will help out as well. And then there is even specific use cases. So what we're trying to document is, as customers come across something and they want to know, how do I do that? You can go in and look at these. So very helpful. Definitely the first spot to go in and take a look at that. Rather than just jump in, start doing some things in the sketcher, spend a little bit of time with this as your starting point. Now, you also can use, we have Accelerator Academy, so we have on-demand learning. There are things about the sketcher in there, and then obviously learning classes that you might take through ATA or Siemens. We'll teach and go through things with the sketcher as well, but definitely something to start with before you get in, because you just don't want to jump in, then find out, man, I don't know why this is doing a certain method or certain way. Come back and take a look at these. These will really give you some good help there. Also then, if you have a certain use case, you can feedback, or if you see something in these help files that you'd want to comment on, you can do that as well. And it's actually been very instrumental in helping us update, improve, make things better in the sketcher as it's been rolled out. So with that, I will stop. I think we still have at least 5 or 10 minutes here for questions. So maybe Brandon, were there any questions in the chat that we want to talk about, or were there any things that we needed to put up on the screen?
Yeah, so there's one question so far that I see anyway. One of them is, can the show movable command animate the degrees of freedom, like some other CAD systems they worked with did? I have a couple comments on that, and maybe you can add to it, Mike, if you think of anything.
Okay.
Whenever
Sure.
you're looking at these sketches and you're drawing these profiles, kind of the first step is showing that the profile is not completely defined. And that's maybe a combination of the show movable that you're talking about, and then the fact that there's text down at the bottom saying it's partially defined or fully defined. So kind of the combination of those two things give you that idea. The show movable will, show you what can move that's not fully defined. However, to animate, the solver itself allows you to quickly drag geometry around. It's very dynamic, to be able to see what is shown as movable and see how it can move and maybe what those degrees of freedom are. But as far as, going into a command and saying, animate this based on the new solver, there's not an automated way. It's more of, hey, you're dynamically working with this geometry, and the show movable is showing you that, hey, these can move, and then you can drag them around to see what those degrees of freedom are. Another thing to keep in mind too is, traditionally when we're, the old sketch solver, or maybe what we're used to doing is saying, hey, I need to lock this down, right? It's more about locking down the sketch so it can't move. Whereas with what we're doing here with the new solver is building in the design intent and helping the new sketch solver, help us out with our design intent and not needing to go in and just completely lock everything down. So there's a little bit of shift in how we're thinking about defining our profile. So just keep that in mind as you start working with the new sketcher.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brandon.
And then as far as the chat, maybe ATA team can help me too. I don't see any other questions in the chat or in the Q&A.
No, not yet. If you have any other questions, you can type into the chat, or we can unmute you so you can ask directly. I do have a question myself, Mike, since we're waiting for other questions. So the design intent, would that algorithm, would that be improved over a few versions downward? How is that data stored? Is that specific to different users? Once you use more of the NX sketcher, it will collect the data and kind of help you more on that in that way, or how would that work?
Yeah, so So it is not specifically like, even though there's intelligence behind it, it's not a machine learning. So it's not learning from you using the sketch. It's actually just, we're looking at the geometry, the relations, those kinds of things that are actually turned on in the sketching environment. So it's not like the, you can do that in NX where it will look at what commands are you using over time, and it will present those to you on the left-hand side. It's not doing that type of machine learning behind the sketcher. It's more, what are the selections that we have, right? So what relations should be found, and then just the rules, right? Dimensions are first, geometry, and then your relations, right? Or if you put a persistent, that kind of jumps the order and controls that.
I see. Got it. Thank you.
Good
And
question.
and I have a question myself. And again, if anyone else out there has questions, please put those in the chat or let us know if you want to unmute. I guess my question is, I didn't realize that there was an option to sort of, use both the new sketcher and the legacy sketcher, like if you were working with a previous model. So that's really cool. I know that there are some folks who don't like the new sketcher and have been using the legacy sketcher. There's like a toggle that you can have that be the default. Is that going to stick around?
So that's a good question. So for the current time, it is. So it is going to be around till we see that, we've migrated our user base to the new sketcher, right? So the toggle for that is available. But again, the longer that you wait, the more, difficult we believe it will be for you, is not jumping into and getting used to the new sketch. We understand you might have workflows and things, but we really encourage you to do that with the new sketcher. And if there is something that we need as the vendor to change or update, we'd like to know those things. And that's really how we've seen the growth over the time, right? Since this was introduced actually as an early access feature in NX 1926, right, was when it first started. So yes, the toggle is there. There's not been a determination yet as to when we're going to turn that off. So it is still available to you. But again, definitely encourage as best you can as a company to look at, moving your team to the new sketching environment.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. I might have opened a can of worms. We just received a question. Where is the toggle?
Sure. That's okay. That is the question. And so again, I don't normally, want to encourage that behavior, but I do know that comes up, right? So here's where that's located. If you go into File Utilities Early Access, not the customer defaults, but if you go into Early Access and search on the sketch, there is this entry for the new solver and the UI, right? So its default state out of the box is it's turned on. So if you are prior to 2306 and you say, hey, I have all these legacy sketches and I'm working on this and I want to stay in that mode, I could maybe see that would be important to you to be able to do that. So it is there. But again, our driving factor is we really, need customers to move in that direction. We don't want to just come up and say, well, there's a cutoff, and now a lot of people are stuck because they've not, learned the new system and worked that. But this is available as a fallback position.
Thank you, Mike. All right, I think we're
well, and there's one more, Mike, I think, sort of talking about like, how do you as an organization think about updating to the new sketcher? So there's a question, the question is, as our own best practice, and this is the person asking the question, as their best practice, they insist that people fully lock down sketches for obvious reasons. So how do you weigh that against the new way of thinking with the new sketcher?
Yeah, so the sketches will still be we call it fully defined. You would say before it was fully constrained, right? My sketch was fully constrained. So the paradigm is you still can do that with the new sketcher, right? When I put all the dimensions, all the detail on there, when my sketch in the new sketch says fully defined, that is equivalent to when you said it was fully constrained with the legacy sketcher. So it's not like we're saying, oh, leave stuff that's movable. No, that's not the intent. The intent is still you want to have a sketch that you feel comfortable with, and this is how it's going to react, right? Because the worst thing for any user is, oh, I think something might have moved, right? But I don't know what moved. You still can fully define sketches with the new sketcher. So yes, you see that when I turn on the, show me the movable stuff, right? What is movable in there? It's similar to the legacy sketch, because in there were a color combination of, hey, these things are fully constrained in the legacy, and this is what could still move, right, on me. There's still that concept. It's just a lot of it is the verbal, what we're calling it and how we're getting to that point. But I would still highly recommend that you make it fully definable. You go in and you assign the dimensions and you put the geometry in to make sure and are comfortable it's not going anywhere, right? That is key to this.
Thank you.
And that's a good question. I mean, that's a very good and important question. I to bring that up, we don't want to give the impression that we're like just, it's just, oh, whatever happens, and good luck with it. That's not the way. It's just that there may be a little bit different way of getting to that full definition, fully defined, than what we were doing with the legacy sketch, but you still can get there. And that was the one that I showed too. Once I had all of the information on, I'm fully defining that sketch. And I know that when I start to exercise my expressions or anything, that it's updating properly.
Very nice. Is there any other questions? I don't see any over here. If not, I think we're at the clock. So I appreciate everyone joining today's webinar. This will be posted online later on. And thank you, Mike and Brandon, for this amazing presentation.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time today. And, again, any questions that you have about the sketch, those can be passed through to the ATA team and then ultimately to myself and Brandon. So, we really want to help you get to the new sketch because we do think there's a lot of value to it. And, we'll help get you there.
Thank you. All right. That concludes our webinar today. Thank you.